Good afternoon. Welcome to our 10th ChaiTime, in which has been a really enjoyable series. Have to admit that me and Prashant and o2h, we love putting these on. It's a bit of work to bring on the right panel and everything else every week, but it's something we've really enjoyed doing. We love doing it. And I'm sitting here in Spanish temperatures today, and we have a Spanish person on the call drinking Spanish beer. It's a bit of San Miguel. It says celebrating 130 years. And so cheers to that. I'll just take I'm in the squelching heat because A, it's very hot, but I have to keep the door shut because the gardener's in the back and his machine might ruin our noise. So I may be sweating away here, but hopefully we can make our panelists sweat today a little bit as well and ask us some good questions on our topic today around digital therapeutics. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Seamus to if you could introduce yourself and your product and what you do and what it does.
Hi, Seamus Hashia, CEO, founder, inventor at Heartfelt Technologies.
And Seamus as well, you've got to tell us which beer you're drinking, just so I'm not the only person drinking a beer.
Yes, I'm drinking something called Brand IPA. I'm currently in the Netherlands, and I love the idea that there's a beer brand called Brand, but that's the only reason I picked it. So for those of us into marketing.
How is it?
It's not bad. It's not bad. So yeah, CEO at Heartfelt Technologies. We try to help the health system and the patients with heart failure, specifically those who are incapable of complying or adhering to medical treatment and advice. It's a small fraction of
Seamus, we've lost you.
Hospitalizations. And what we do to help those patients is we build AI-powered video cameras that go into their home, detect the symptoms of heart failure about 2 weeks before they get hospitalized. So this whole remote patient monitoring, remote care, remote therapeutics thing has obviously gained a lot of traction in the last few months for obvious reasons, but it's been building for a long time. I've been in the sector for a long time. My previous company was a sort of remote patient monitoring fertility company. So I've been around the block on a few of these issues, and it's really interesting to see the world starting to take notice of these sort of technologies now. So I look forward to the discussion and questions.
Thank you very much, Seamus. We think your product's like highly interesting. I mean, Seamus, when he in between businesses was telling me about the idea, he built a prototype literally in his garage and brought it in. He's the most amazing sort of scientist and engineer that we could come across, and I appreciate all his help in helping us evaluate other opportunities as well. So thanks, Seamus. So maybe we'll go to Nigel next, who's probably the most experienced out of all of us on various fronts. You can tell by the hair.
I won't go there. Beer. So today I'm drinking the Thirsty Bell. It's a lovely brewery one. So cheers to you too, and thank you for the invitation to join you today. So brief bit of background. So I've spent most of my career in venture capital, and I've come across many of you, many of the participants on this call in that role. But transitioned to becoming the CEO of a business called Ieso Digital Health, which is based in Cambridge. Sort of in March of last year, actually. So I've now been about 15, 16 months in the role. And what Ieso does is it provides high quality cognitive behavioural therapy, primarily to patients within the NHS at this point in time, but using the data that we collect about mental health and their conditions and how we treat them, we aim to improve therapy. We aim to actually move therapy more into the digital domain and away from face-to-face constraint with therapists being the main constraint, and into the zone where actually a digital bot may be able to provide the same high quality therapy across the world. And that's our key vision. That's where we're ultimately aiming to get to. But right here, right now, today, we've probably seen double the amount of patients being treated via our platform, typically for depression and anxiety during lockdown. And so that means that this year we'll probably treat in the order of about 30,000 patients within the NHS.
That is amazing. That is amazing. That's a great service you're providing during the lockdown. So Thank you for that. So, Gili, do you want to give us a background of Neurofenix and the product, if you have it in front of you? I don't know if you do.
I do. I'll show you now. Thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Guillem Singla. I'm the co-founder and chief executive officer of Neurofenix. Basically, what we want is
which beer are you drinking?
I'm not actually drinking beer. It's sparkling water.
Okay.
Off the call.
Yeah, so we want to support people regain independence after a stroke. That's what we aim for, and we want to do that by providing the world's best experience for their therapy experience in the comfort of their home. We really want them to feel, both patients and clinicians, that there's a therapy partner there. And our product, and now I'm going to show it, is a combination of a software platform, so our digital therapy platform, and a combination of devices with sensors that provide the therapy and measure the outcomes. So, for instance, our first product, which I have inside here, is the Neuroball. That's focused on training fingers, elbow, wrist, and shoulder. And the platform itself is basically on a tablet, where the patients can see all the exercises and the training that they need to do, progress tracking, and we have the first online leaderboard where different stroke survivors can compete against each other and provide motivation and support, which really they need. They really need some support, because how I started being obsessed about helping people regain independence is my uncle, who had a stroke, and I saw how difficult it is for patients. So our product is really life-changing, and I hope we can help so many other patients throughout the next few years. And we know that that during the lockdown we got so many calls from the NHS trying to get products from us to help the patients that they cannot see. So we just hope that we're helping them too.
Gili, that's amazing. Thank you for that. I mean, when I saw the product, my mother, who didn't have a stroke, she had a meningioma, which is like a benign tumor which they have to remove. But sometimes the recovery is very similar to the symptoms of stroke. And so Gili kindly sent us one of his machines after we made the investment, I have to say. But I've used it with my mother, and it really is amazing. And the videos, the way the games work, this is really this is one of the best digital therapeutics that I've actually seen, and probably, apart from Heartfelt, the only one we've invested into. And so, I think we've sort of, we really appreciate the product from a personal perspective, and I think it's going to have great appeal. Patrick, over to you. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your product, and if you're drinking a beer, which one? If you're not, it's okay.
Sure. So I'm Patrick Belden. I'm the CEO of Corterio, and we're developing portable brain imaging to diagnose head injuries at the point of care. I'm drinking tea today because we're a little short-stocked, and it was either this or whiskey.
You're actually meant to be drinking tea. It's a chai time. So this is the 10th, you're doing good.
So the problem we're tackling is traumatic brain injury, basically people hitting their heads. And these are the leading cause of death and disability for the under 45s, also a massive problem for older people, especially with falls. And the problem is diagnosing their head injury when the equipment needed to do this is big, expensive pieces of kit like CT scanners. And these are only available in hospitals. And so there are many people that get missed. So by enabling clinicians to detect more head injuries and quickly and reliably throughout the clinical pathway, whether it's ambulances in emergency departments or on wards in hospitals, we help them to identify problems early and get in there and fix them. And
do you have an example of the prototype in front of you, or do you not have one there?
I've seen
a picture of it, which looks pretty cool.
So we're at the benchtop prototype stage, and because of lockdown, that's with my CTO at home. That's taking up space in their living room. So he has a very understanding girlfriend.
So I think I had some questions, but given what I'm hearing is that I think one of the massive advantages of digital therapeutics is really sort of the home. And I think COVID brings this out is the fact that it's kind of portable almost. And a lot of what you described is home-based. do we think digital therapeutics is going to really advance or promote, given that we've been in lockdown and we've heard that from a few of you that they've, even before the course started, that you're more busy now than you've ever been. You've had a huge amount of interest in what you're doing. So maybe you could comment around that first, as how COVID-19 has affected the way that people view either your product or the sector in general. And I'll start with Nigel first, because I think, you've given us some actual numbers and you've probably a bit more, your business is more advanced than some of the others. So maybe you could give a perspective on how lockdown's affecting the sector in general.
Yeah, so specifically related to us, we provide online digital therapy. So what's the main impact has been that obviously 95% plus of therapy is today conducted, or mental health therapy is today conducted face-to-face. And so clearly when COVID-19 hit, you had services that traditionally provide face-to-face therapy facing a variety of different challenges. The first challenge was that many of their staff started to self-isolate. Many of the staff actually started to switch to frontline activities, and some of the staff were ill. And then on top of that, they also then felt the need, obviously, to work from home and to adopt digital or sort of more what we would advanced means of communication, being the telephone or possibly Zoom or other activities. But even when they started to transition down that path, they found that they had themselves virtually, the NHS is quite IT poor. So when it comes to systems and when it comes to laptops and when it comes to availability of things on an individual basis, it's often quite IT poor. And so they've had to go through this whole running hard to build up those IT infrastructure that support delivering a service by their own therapists that support patients that are out there. And I think that's where a lot of our current clients turn to us, because we obviously already had credibility with many of those clients. We were already treating many patients for them. And so their instant response was to sort of send a lot of volume into our direction. So trying to manage the patients that they would normally see in a face-to-face environment using digital methodologies, but us being an established player, we saw a lot of those people coming to us directly. So that was the very first impact. I think we sort of monitor it in lots of different ways, but over the whole history of Ieso, which has been going for some years now, we've sort of been building up the number of therapy hours per day that we deliver. Before Christmas, it had got to 400 therapy hours just before Christmas on one day. And then over the last 4 months, last 5 months, it's actually gone through 500 hours in March, 600 hours in April, 700 hours in May. So you can sort of see the amount of volume that was being pushed in our direction.
That's amazing.
That aside, there's something more fundamental there, which has been, we've been operating for a number of years now within that environment, and we've always faced a degree of resistance. So there's always been resistance to changing the paradigm of care. And a lot of people sort of see digital methodologies or just doing things differently as being something that they're really resistant to actually adopting. And I think what we are seeing now through this COVID-19 crisis is that the system as a whole has been forced to rethink it and reevaluate where it goes with technology. And it's not just about ease of access. It's not just about modes of communication. For us, and for, I guess, many of the people on this call, it's actually about doing things better. It's about breaking the paradigm of care that currently exists in order to deliver care better for the patients that require it. And, and I think that's where the healthcare system really needs to up its game and really start to think about how it adopts digital therapies, digital therapies or digital methodologies, because we have the power to do things better, to challenge the existing norms, to break the existing paradigms, and ultimately to treat many more people in a much more cost-effective way. So, I think that's ultimately what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think I completely agree that we've been forced down this. When you with COVID-19, we've been forced into changing the way we think about how we receive therapy. no one could imagine that all your appointments with the doctor could be done over the telephone or over whatever it is. And now it's almost, I have no desire, even after COVID, to go to doctor surgery to ask for a prescription for swimmers here, which I actually had this week. So it's forced us into this change. So Gillian, with your product, it's something that people can use at home. Have you seen this surge of activity? Do you feel that you're able to help more people now? People will feel more comfortable with your product and how they use it?
We've seen, I completely agree with Nigel. We actually have seen, it was actually the first few weeks after the lockdown where I basically called every single NHS customer we had, and we said, how are you dealing with this new situation? And they all were telling me the same, that, well, we have most of the stroke survivors, we just send home with the piece of paper and we cannot even see them. So imagine somebody having a stroke, 2 days later waking up in hospitals, 4 days later at home, let's say, and they cannot receive that urgent therapy. So they basically told us, can you just send your product to the address of that patient and have them set it up and have them start doing the therapy they really need? And that's what we did. So we started with working with our NHS customers, and they were transferring patients to us. Our product is basically comes in a box, they open the box, and it's almost no setup, which is the best setup. And,
I see with your product, even pre-COVID, there was a huge gap, a huge need for intelligent physiotherapy that someone can do by themselves or using a computer at home, because it's hard to put those kind of labor hours into a person, and they really need it as soon as possible after, say, a stroke. And I saw with your product that they could do that very quickly off the get-go from home, and probably do many more hours intelligently with, I call it an intelligent mouse, your box. And I could really see sort of the value of that. But I think post-COVID, no one's going to be in hospital. No one wants to be around those areas. People are going to be channeled and forced into using your product because there's probably very little alternative out there for people to do physiotherapy. I see it as a complete game changer. As Nigel's product as well, it's a game-changing technology, really, that can help and support patients, which is ultimately what this is about. So I see it positively.
We basically realized that in the NHS, it was difficult for them to just trust that we can just send them a product, and the therapist can, of course, set the goals, because it's all about setting the right goals and the numerable on our product. How is it aligned to that goals? But honestly, I've seen that the trust, let's say, on our product has been forced, and now they're sending more and more patients. So they just had to give us more patients to show it, and that's what happens. And actually, in terms of private, because we've not discussed how the private sector has dealt with it, but in terms of private clinics, they saw their revenue from zero, like from whatever they had, to zero, because they couldn't do any hands-on therapy, like physical therapy. That we've got contact with many centers who said, how can I build my teletherapy capabilities now, and not just now, but for the long term? Because if there's a second wave, if there's a COVID 2023, how can I make sure that my revenues don't go back to zero? So I think both NHS and private sector really are benefiting from these home-based technologies, not only the Neurable, but other home-based technologies.
I'm going to jump around my questions a bit to Seamus and Patrick on these two, but others can jump in. It's something you bring up about selling into the NHS, and I've heard it's notoriously difficult to sell to the NHS, and it sounds like Nigel has broken through that. I'd love to hear experiences. And Gilly as well. And, I guess Patrick's slightly earlier stage with this product, but it's trying to engage. But I'll just move to Seamus first for his experience about selling into the NHS. And do you really need a US strategy? We've got such a marvelous, large buyer of our products.
Yeah, good question. I found it to be much easier than some people suggest to sell into the NHS, provided you're selling several £1,000s worth of kit for 1 penny. That works quite well. And the reason you might want to do that, and this is our natural home advantage as being UK-based tech companies, if you go and set up a clinical trial, you can easily be paying £1,000 a patient. If you need to collect data for, in our case, an AI-based platform that needs a lot of training data of real patients, I think that's actually similar for most of the people on this call, you need patient data more than you need revenue. And you have wonderful people like Sunil and friends who are willing to give you money to go out and collect patient data, whether it be by a trial or whatever. Now, our patient group that we target are what you might call systematically non-compliant patients, often with dementia or alcoholism or other underlying issues there. They are the least likely people to turn up on a clinical trial. So it's really hard to design a clinical trial that catches these people and has any chance of recruiting well. So our mechanism of selling into the NHS is actually sort of a trials by stealth, because you want these patients that wouldn't normally go into a trial. You want to get hold of them in a health system that keeps good records, has good infrastructure for keeping tabs on patients, community care, that sort of thing. And so as long as you're willing to sell an absolute loss, the NHS is not that challenging to get into. It is more challenging than you would expect when you're giving them, thousands of pounds worth of stuff for a penny. But it's not as challenging as people say, about getting into the NHS in general. I just wonder whether those people were perhaps trying to make money. I mean, just don't think about doing that with the NHS. You're insane. But to actually sell into the NHS for a penny, that's actually, that's quite a good process.
Do you think that means that we may get innovation, much further down the line than say other countries which pay for innovation, like Germany or the US, for example?
I think we possibly get innovation reasonably early because the NHS is open to working with new technologies in small parts, right? Because it's split up into lots of different pieces. If you find an enthused clinician in some arm of the NHS in some far distant part that you met at a conference, as long as it doesn't cost the NHS that much, your chances of getting something taken up by them and a couple of their friends is quite good. And you need that preliminary data. You really need it like gold dust in the early days of your technology, right? And then you can start building the evidence base, and then you can start thinking about how you might go and make money. And inevitably, that means going to the US, possibly to Germany, France, etc. But the US is the goal for basically everyone. And so if you can collect...
So how difficult was it for you to, I mean, I know you've got an FDA approval recently. How difficult was it and challenging from the UK was it for you to be able to do that?
So we actually were extremely fortunate in the way in which we got regulated. Well, possibly fortunate in the choice of project we undertook because we saw how we could do this. We got through FDA faster than we got through Europe. Now we started Europe earlier. But FDA took us, I think it was 21 pages of A4, 82 days and one phone call, and we were through. Now that's because we had a strategy for this product that we were developing based around a whole series of exemptions that they can provide. So if right before you even start developing your product, you understand the regulatory landscape and you're aiming for a very particular route through, then it can be quite fast. Normally, the FDA is much slower than Europe, but our case is a little unusual in that regard. But there is nothing quite like doing your homework before you go and start your company and design your technology and take loads of money from people, and that pressure and the timeline starts running. Right? Spend the time doing the homework right at the start on exactly how you're going to navigate your regulatory path, both US and Europe and around the world.
Thank you, Seamus. So Patrick, so there's a question from Matthew Clark, which I think, given that you're slightly earlier in your life cycle of developing your company, I think A is, have you had any engagement with the NHS, just to tailor off the last question, but also what support have you had and would you like to have had from central government? I know you are discussing various amounts of support, so you may not want to answer it in full, but what can you say about this support that you would like to receive?
Yeah, so we have received funding from the UK government, including from the NHS and the Ministry of Defence. those basically come through grants. So they've been very helpful, and effectively, in terms of, to answer the question directly, what support, if any, do companies want from central government? There's often a lot of support that gets offered in terms of training or connection services, but often they will tell you, they'll point you in the direction, but they won't actually solve the problem for you. Typically, the thing that early stage companies need is cash, and they have a set of problems, and cash is fungible, right? So if you have a problem that you need to sort out your IP, or you need to build some tech, or you need to go and do some customer dev, cash will allow you to do whatever.
Basically more money. You basically want more money.
Effectively, yes.
Okay,
and
got it.
Well,
that we understand.
I think
Seamus.
making a more nuanced point there, Sunil, which is the spend the government makes on trying to support companies is often negatively efficient. Because you get a very small company of perhaps 3 or 4 key people, you take one of those people out for a day to go to some government networking event, which is billed as helping you to solve these problems. You have a room of perhaps 150 such people. Let's imagine that their day rate, if you're burning capital, should be at least several thousand a day of time you're taking out of your business. Right? It's not how much you're being paid personally, it's how much it's costing the business for you to forego a day, right? So you're talking about a room that is taking out hundreds of thousands of pounds of people's time to listen to some people saying, go look at our website, right? And not actually provide any concrete answers to concrete problems, because the government doesn't have an army of free IP lawyers who are going to actually file your patent for you, or free regulatory consultants that are actually going to get your product through regulatory.
It's a good point, but I think, I think the government has provided us a bit of cash, and even post-COVID, and is supported Patrick's business. Always can be done more efficiently, as you say. But I think we appreciate all the support the government has given us. I'm just going to move on slightly. Sorry, Patrick, go on.
Just to clarify.
Yes.
No, so I mean, what I will say is especially the support we received has done exactly that. So we're the funding we received from the National Institute of Health Research. They had this sort of technically uncapped, but typically around £1 million grant, which we're now actually through to the second stage of. But they introduced, and what they realized with that was, the procedure to apply for that and get it can take more than a year, and that was kind of killing early stage companies. So what they did was they launched a much quicker to apply for, smaller amount of money, capped at 150k, that you could, apply for and get on a few months scale. And so, central government definitely has seen these things and responded to them. So, in terms of what we'd like to see, I think the ways of getting cash efficiently to solve the problems is a really important one. And
I've got another question. So it's sort of building on that. It's really around that we can have government funding, and small funds like mine or other VCs can support the sector as well. But ultimately, what's going to really drive the industry, I feel, is, especially in the UK, for our British technology innovations, is going to be the larger big pharma or the larger tech giants. And the larger pharma have really driven the biotech sector in the UK, I believe, with early stage collaborations and funding some of that scientific research before a VC or before a listing, etc. Are we seeing and feeling that with in digital therapeutics now? Do the big pharma, are they interested in what we are doing and what you are doing? Is it the Oracles and the Apples and the Facebooks are interested in what we're doing? So where do you feel the driver from the larger company is going to come from? I'm going to go to Nigel, because he has a depth of experience in investing and in the space.
Yes, I guess we're in quite an interesting position, because behavioural therapy is actually quite well established. It's got quite well established links with certainly long-term chronic conditions and disease management for long-term chronic conditions. And so we actually have sort of a trial underway at the moment, a study underway, which we've already talked about, which is with Roche, looking at type 2 diabetes. We've got another couple of big pharma interested, one in the respiratory space, one in the cancer space. So, people are very, very definitely.
And have you seen the big pharma developing, because 5 years ago, they wouldn't have had a digital therapeutic part of their business. Have you seen this part of big pharma's business grow, and the people and the talent they can use to assess these opportunities?
I think there has been. It's a very broad church though. So people refer to digital therapeutics in lots and lots of different ways, and and I think that sort of extends down into trying to do. We talk about therapy and how that might be an adjunct to providing a drug or a condition. But others sort of talk about it even further down the chain, talking about it in R&D. So you do quite a lot of investing in that sort of area, looking at improving the discovery processes, for instance. But actually, we're much more focused around clinical, and I think that's ultimately where a lot of these pharma companies will actually make a play, because fundamentally they are still drug companies. If they can improve the profitability or extend the lifetime of their big drug franchises, then there's an awful lot of value in that for them.
But do you think it's about improving the profitability of their drug franchises, or could it be that they're just another way to help patients, and they're kind of expanding rather than improving their base?
I think both. I think a lot of I think they do go hand in hand, but I think pharma is fundamentally a very big, strong commercial machine. They don't tend to do things sort of for the good of everybody unless they can see some kind of financial reward.
So Guilherme, maybe because your product doesn't actually enhance a particular drug or a particular part of a big pharma franchise, but have you seen any interest for your product which helps patients but may not fit into what they would traditionally do? So have you had any interest from big pharma, or is it the tech companies, or have you not got to that stage yet?
We got some early conversations with a big tech company who was looking at basically collecting data in terms of the recovery of not only stroke survivors, but tracking sleep, basically collecting data in general. We put that partnership aside because that's not our key focus. But yes, in terms of pharma, there was an initial conversation, but as we are now focused on we see that as a long term, that we're building that relationship slowly. And I do believe that they are very much interested on anything that can provide more, basically better quality therapy at home, but also have a complete picture of that patient. Of course, we need to be careful about data privacy, GDPR, but at the same time, I think that data can really help on personalizing the treatment. And that's, I think, what I've heard a lot on that conversation.
So Patrick and Seamus, have you had any interactions with the big pharma or the giant tech companies, and where do you feel their interest lies in this space?
Yeah, so we are a development company, all right? We're not a commercial company, as you might have guessed from my mechanism of commercializing with the NHS. The long-term goal for us is to partner with one of these large companies in order to get our technology out there, because for us as a small company to go and hire the sales force and get into particularly a system as disparate and large as the US Medicare system, that would take an enormous level of funding and an enormous change in the structure of the company and staff and so on. It's entirely possible, right? That's what VCs are there for, is to fund this sort of stuff, and they like to do that. But if you've got a willing commercial partner that you can work with to go and do that, as long as what you're doing is complementary to what they're already doing, then this makes a huge amount of sense. So for us, it's not so much the drug companies, because the main drug that we actually help to get used more effectively are diuretics, which have mostly been off patent for decades. So no drug company is going to go and dive into supporting a tech company in order to make an extra 5 cents worth of diuretic sales out of patients, right? Not going to happen. However, the large medical device companies that are chopping patients open and sticking devices inside their hearts in order to monitor this patient group. The patient group we're looking at, they're the ones that incur a huge amount of the cost, but they're also the ones that often don't meet various health economic thresholds to have heart surgery to stick in one of these big devices. So we present a really nice way for those companies to expand their patient group that they can address, so that they can go to the clinicians they're talking to and give them just another thing that they can provide their patients. So as you say, it's about helping patients, but it's not just helping patients altruistically, it's massively improving the size of their market. And some of these patients will naturally then follow into having some of their very much more expensive devices put in. So it's sort of like a funnel-based approach as well for them to a degree. So if you can find a big commercial partner that has that sort of driver to work with you, then that can be a nice way of doing things. Again, a bit unique to the exact business that we're running, but if you think about the technology as you develop it in this sort of light, then you may be able to spot similar opportunities.
Thank you, Seamus, for that answer. Patrick, do you have any engagement with the big pharma or the big tech companies as of today? And
yes, we've had a few conversations. I'm not sure how much I can say about those, but one thing I'll say about sort of digital therapeutics in general, with regards to tech companies versus pharma companies, is that one of the exciting things is that you have both options, right? And especially if you're developing an enabling technology that gives you new capability, there are different products in a sense that are interesting to both sides. And so one of the advantages of being in a sort of hybrid space, digital therapeutics or diagnostics, is that you speak to multiple people.
Thank you for that.
So can I just come back on?
Yeah.
I think it's quite an important one. And actually, when you look at the investment space, that has also been a challenge for digital therapeutics, has been that it doesn't naturally sit either in drugs or in devices or in software or in other areas. It doesn't have a natural acquirer in the same way that a biotech company might, for instance. So if you were developing a novel cancer therapeutic, you'd know what your sort of your universe of potential buyers might be and your universe of potential partners might be. Not been quite the same around digital therapeutics, because you go in any number of different directions, and that has been, to date, that has been an impediment, I think, for a lot of investment into the sector, because funds have typically been raised to be either life science funds or technology-based funds. And so they play to those core themes, and anything that sort of sits at the edge or straddles other areas has become a more challenging space for them to invest in part because they don't know the exit trajectory, but also they don't know what the commercialization trajectory is. So, I think it has been a more challenging space. I think the reality, though, is that now you're seeing more successful companies start to come through. You're seeing greater traction, even at sort of startup stage, with devices or other modes of treating patients, gathering pace quite quickly within the healthcare systems that we serve. And I think fundamentally, if people are starting to switch on to this idea, this concept that if we can treat patients better and get better outcomes within this system and ultimately get paid for that, then there is a value proposition there. And if there's a value proposition, it doesn't necessarily matter whether it's going to be a pharma that buys you or a big tech company that buys you. If you've got a strong value proposition, you've got something that you can make money.
It brings me to my next question. It's really about sort of the value that's created from an early stage of digital therapeutic to a more mature stage. And we can see in the biotech space that it starts very low, actually, but it does go through the gears fairly rapidly. It's a perception, and we can discuss if this is true or not, that there's more risk with the biotech versus a digital therapeutic. It's more predictable risk maybe with a digital therapeutic, but the exit values are colossal in biotech if you get through to a drug product. How does it stand in digital therapeutics? And I know that Seamus and maybe Nigel may have a better grip on this question. So maybe I'll go to Seamus first, and then if Gillian and Patrick have a view, we can add that in as well.
So I think everyone would like to think that you're going to go and get a drug company exit for your software that you've had a 3-man team going right. That I think we need to think very carefully about what people are buying, right? So what is that valuation for? For drugs, you've usually got a patented molecule or something like that. And that molecule is going to give someone 20 years of exclusivity on the treatment of some condition. And you've also often got a massive regulatory barrier. That means that someone else is going to take a long time to come through with any alternative mechanism to you to treat those patients. And usually you've got a patient pool there that is undertreated. Often pharma's pretty good at dividing up the disease pie, if you like, and not all of them attacking the same space at once, because you would not generate that much profit for everyone. If you are able to generate a digital therapeutic or device or something like that that shares those properties of having really robust patent protection around it, a smooth clinical pathway through the regulatory to clinicals, and good clinical data coming out of trials, there's in principle no reason why you shouldn't have valuations similar to the drug companies, as long as your profit margin out the end is going to be similar. Making an actual drug doesn't cost that much. Inventing it and getting it to regulatory does. So your margins can be great. So if it's a digital application that uses someone else's pre-existing hardware, that can be great. If it's a digital application that needs £100,000 worth of hardware to go into the clinic or something like that, it's more like the sort of X-ray machine, big white box market. So you've really got to look at the specifics of the business and what it's bringing to the market, I think, in order to think about whether it's fair to think about it in, sort of pharma biotech valuation ways, or conventional, durable medical equipment ways.
And coming on to the cost advantages, I know that it's a point that you made to me earlier. Do you feel that digital therapeutics can deliver the exponential cost advantage in per unit, support to a patient that a drug company could deliver? Do you think you'll get that advantage with a digital therapeutic?
So there's elements of predominantly software-based businesses. The costs of what you're doing are crashing and continuing to reduce. Conventional medical devices, say you're making a stent, say, that goes into somebody, your cost of manufacturing that device today and your cost of manufacturing in 10 years are going to be about the same. If you're making an electronic device that the patient uses, your costs today might be higher than that small piece of wire that's the stent. But in 10 years, it's definitely going to be way, way, way lower. And so over the lifetime of that product, and particularly by the time the patents come off that product and you can't get a monopoly out of it and you have to compete with people, right, the costs of that will be so low that your margins will be fantastic. So there's a very different dynamic over time, because your cost of goods fundamentally drops over time for most digital aspects of products, as long as they ride on consumer technology, right? If you're having to build your own chip for this or something like that, it doesn't have the same effect. So you have to be a little bit careful as to exactly what type of digital technology people are using. But yes, in many cases, there's this fantastic reduction in cost over time.
Thank you for that, Seamus. So Nigel, sort of the valuation question, and do we get the increases, and are patients receiving a more cost, as the unit cost become more efficient over time with the electronic products versus the biotechs?
Well, I think it's a challenge of all digital therapeutics is ultimately to articulate that cost-benefit argument, that they absolutely should. I mean, the main benefit, I think, of many of these digital therapeutics, you ultimately start to take people out of the system, and people are the biggest cost within any healthcare system. So, if you don't have to have a therapist providing 10 hours of therapy in a face-to-face environment, you've saved yourself a ton of money. And if you don't have to have physiotherapists go out to treat stroke patients, you've saved yourself a ton of money. So, you know, this is where the cost benefit comes from. I guess, unfortunately, with many healthcare systems, they consider a lot of that to be sunk cost, because the cost is already a fixed cost baked into their approach and into the paradigm. And so you're sort of always trying to articulate an argument which is that you can remove these costs, but actually those costs will stick around many of those systems. I think that's where the real benefit of digital therapeutics comes, is that you will drive out ultimately a lot of that cost within the system. You'll make it much more broadly accessible. So it's going to be, for us, it looks more like a software-based product with software-type margins when we start to articulate a product that's available to everybody on their smartphones wherever you are. And that's the real advantage that I think you have to offer. But you have to build towards that, and you have to demonstrate that you've got the credentials to be able to deliver that, and you've got to do that within a clinical context. And it's that part that's the more expensive bit, is demonstrating that you can do that within a regulatory environment. Because if you can, I think you're actually going to be generating a significant amount of value around an exit. And, you know, actually, I noticed there's one or two questions about what does the system look like. I mean, we compare ourselves in some sense at the moment to some of the telehealth players. And if you looked at telehealth in the US right now, the biggest player is Teladoc, and I think they're being valued currently on about 21 times revenues. So, you know, and these are not inconsiderable revenues either. These are big companies that are being highly valued. And what do they deliver? They just deliver a better way of doing telehealth. They're not actually fundamentally changing outcomes for patients, but they're just finding ways of doing things better. So, you know, there's a vast amount of inefficiency in the healthcare system, and if digital therapeutics can contribute towards removing some of those inefficiencies, there is value in doing so, and therefore there is value to an acquirer that might be able to take that.
Great points, Nigel. Thank you for that. I've got a question from Anupendra, who's head of Seaman Ventures in the US. So we'll go to Gilliam first, and I'll read out his question, and we'll ask the same question to all the panelists, starting with Gilliam, and then Patrick, and then Seamus and Nigel. And if you want to comment on the last point, you can start off with that. So what is an example of a commercial success in digital therapeutics today that each of you look as a dream outcome for you? What is the exit? Who are the buyers in this space?
As you said, I'll start. Just to comment on the last point, it's
Yep.
In terms of, Nigel, what you were saying about how we almost remove the cost of the human resource and make health more optimize it. Basically, in our case, how we see this, one therapist right now can see 5, 6, 7, 8 patients a day. If you put a system in place where they can see 40, 50, and they can only see the ones that really need this hands-on therapy, you're basically optimizing the system. And that's exactly one of the value propositions that we talk with many NHS and private centers. So I just wanted that there, because it's about using the existing resources and really amplifying what they can achieve. And that's one of the key goals that we have. In terms of the question, I think you said, in terms of commercial success, so we look at two companies specifically on the digital therapy aspect, which are Hinge Health and Sword. These two companies are mainly US focused, and they provide a home-based therapy solution with equipment. They're focused on MSK, so the musculoskeletal market, and they are the ones that are leading the way in the US in terms of how we change the approach from I need to go and see my physiotherapist to my physiotherapist will give me homework, I will do it, and then I will check on them when I need to progress. So I look at them as an inspiration.
Thank you. So Patrick?
Yeah, so I suppose our dream outcome is, there's less a company as our kind of inspiration, but our company is our inspiration is MRI or any of the other imaging modalities that, doesn't just do one thing. It's an enabling technology that allows you to do lots of things and really, really changes the clinical pathway. And I think the difference that we have, which I think is a theme for all of the companies and a lot of digital therapeutics, is about increasing the effective contact time through the clinical pathway. So rather than just taking the patient to the practitioner and having a nurse, a physiotherapist, or a therapist interacting with the patient, you can have the technology, your therapeutic, your diagnostic, follow the patient around, so you can be much more patient focused rather than system focused. And in terms of potential exits for us and who buyers may be, this again would be potentially someone with existing interests in medical imaging who's then interested in building more of a solution throughout the clinical pathway rather than just having the one point of contact with the patient.
Thank you, Patrick. So we go to Seamus and then Nigel, and then we'll do one more question after that. And
sure. So the quick follow-up to Nigel's very perceptive insight on the last question, that although in many cases what we're doing is we're helping to get rid of people, if you might say, in healthcare, whether that is directly through fewer therapists needed or indirectly through fewer hospital beds needing to be taken up with fewer nurses nursing them, and that hospitals and healthcare systems see that as a sunk cost. It's actually very hard to unemploy a nurse or something like that because there's unlimited extra work that they can go off and be applied to do. That's entirely correct. There's a different way to look at this. For many disease states that we have, and Nigel's sitting in one on mental health, and we are in cardiovascular care, there is an enormous tsunami of patients ahead of us. We know coming towards us at such a rate in the near future, very near future, that healthcare systems will be unable to build hospitals and train nurses fast enough to deal with the patient volumes that they will need to if they maintain even current levels of care, right? And current levels of care are definitely not optimal. So it's not so much that we're saving nurses who are currently employed today or saving therapists that are currently employed today. It's about allowing the current staffing levels to deal with a very much higher volume of cases. And there are particular disease areas where this is such an acute problem, and the demographics just show us exactly what's going to happen in the future. So perceptive insight by Nigel, but I respectfully disagree. Anyway, onto this question about who do you look up to and who you're going to sell to. We compare ourselves a lot to a company called CardioMEMS. It's a device that monitors pretty much the same patient group for pretty much the same health problem. So heart failure patients looking for the buildup of fluids that lead to congestive heart failure, acute events and admissions to hospitals. They basically sold themselves on the basis of reducing hospitalizations exactly as we do. Their device has to go in at the artery by the aorta. It's pretty much heart surgery, although it can be done through a catheter up the inside of the leg. But that's pretty invasive, and it costs something like $30,000 per patient. Our device is based on consumer electronics, cameras that you get out of things like video game consoles and current generation mobile phones, and it requires no patient physical contact whatsoever. So you're addressing the same problem in a radically lower cost, radically less invasive way. That company was bought in 2014 by Synergy Medical for $455 million straight after they passed their FDA process. We've already passed FDA, already ready to go in the States. So in theory, we should be going and selling to the same sorts of people, in the near future. Watch this space sort of thing. We think we've got a little way to go yet before we're.
On that note, Seamus, we're very happy to be an investor in you. Nigel, if you can make a brief answer, and I'll just do one last question to wrap it up because there's a few that we need to get through.
Yeah, cool. So I don't think there have been that many exits specifically in our mental health space, but the ones that we look to as being sort of out there in the same sort of direction that we're heading, and people like Therapeutics, Big Health, Happify. So these companies are raising substantial amounts of money, and you know they're actually targeting the same kind of space that we are. James's point, you know, mental health affects 1 in 4 adults every year. So this is a massive market that you can't just solve with the current system of care. If I was targeting anyone that sort of said, okay, what's potential around digital and data and how that might help, you know, I'd always look back at Flatiron's exit to Roche a couple of years back, because that was $1.9 billion that Roche paid for the information that Flatiron was delivering around oncology. And you know, anecdotally, we hear back that sort of Roche seems to internally believe that it recovered the cost of that within 12 months, just on the basis of doing things better. So the information drove different choices within the business, and that 1.9 billion that was spent paid itself back within 12 months. And I think that's the advantage here. If you have data, you have information, you have knowledge, you're able to change the way that things are done. This is how you ultimately generate value.
You're muted.
We have a few great questions here from Rowan about the opportunity in China, from Tina Crombie around data specificity and whether we get gender bias, from Theo Zacharias around clinical trials and getting approval, how appropriate is a placebo in a clinical trial for a digital therapeutic. There's quite a lot of big answers there, and we are very much at the end of time. I don't know if anyone has an opinion on any one of those three that they would like to give. As a wrap up, maybe you could choose the answer out of those three. So hopefully we can answer some of those questions. So you can pick from the three. Seamus, you first, and do your final closing statement at the same time, because this is it.
Yep. I can shoot on what's an appropriate placebo in digital. If you think about it differently, actually, we can do fantastic placebo-controlled studies in digital therapeutics, digital health, in the same way that Google and all their friends have been doing A/B testing on every patient or every user on their websites. We can do exactly the same thing to show not only the overall benefit of the product, but every change that we make at the back end of the software. So actually, clinical trials, RCTs, we should be doing better than drugs do in digital health. So closing statement, I think, you know, digital is definitely the way to go, as every executive's been saying for the past 20 years. Finally, the world seems to be waking up to it, partly thanks to COVID. So thank you very much to a small virus that's demonstrated to the world that we should really stay at home and monitor our patients and take care of them remotely.
Thank you very much, Seamus. Brilliantly done. Brilliant summary. Patrick, maybe you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I'll take the do digital solutions risk amplifying demographic characteristics. So yeah, I'd say it's not just gender. There's all sorts of demographic characteristics that you have to look at and be careful of, especially as many digital diagnostics or therapeutics rely on collecting big data sets, having some magic in the middle and getting a result. So getting the population represented in the data set is always going to be important. So I think that's always going to be a challenge, and that always has been a challenge. That would just become more obvious. Oh, I think you're muted again, Sunil.
I said thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you very much to me. So Gilly, maybe you'll go next and we'll give the final word to Nigel.
I actually will expand on what Seamus has said in terms of A/B testing, because it's exactly what we're doing. So we have all our patients training with our platform at home. We launch a new activity. We measure the rise of engagement or how it falls, and we can literally know every step that we do on our platform, how it increases engagement, which we know it's tied up on how many repetitions they do, which we know is linked to the recovery and the neuroplasticity of the brain. So actually we can really, almost in real time, improve our product in a way that really maximizes outcomes. And I think that's a very unique way of developing a product. And I don't think it was available a few years ago. And so I think in terms of placebo or actually just A/B testing, that it's a very powerful tool that we can be using to improve patients' outcomes. And in terms of my closing statement is, I received a call last week. A stroke survivor just had a stroke. Sorry, it was the wife actually. My husband had a stroke. He's not receiving any therapy. We are at home. He cannot move his arm. What am I going to do? We need to have an answer for these patients, and digital therapeutics, and in our case, products where you can just ship to the patients' homes and they can start using, is the way to go.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Nigel, final short word to you.
I'll probably pick up the amplification of gender-specific info and the like. I guess, you know, the beauty of our system is that we're actually collecting data of every single transaction that we have with a patient. So we have over 300,000 hours of therapy that's transcripted. That's our data asset that we mine and look forward to. But then each of the patients that's participating online with us is referred from the NHS. So it is a representative sample of those that are seeking therapy within the NHS. So I guess that's the beauty, you know, Seamus mentioned it, you know, the beauty of working with the NHS is that you do get very big data sets. They are quite diverse, they are quite representative, certainly here in the UK population. And so we hope that is not too led by certain trends. But the key bit is, if you have all of the data, you have the information, you have the knowledge, so you can start to dissect it and do the analysis and make sure that you can treat patients in a way that is very specific to them going forwards. I guess my final points around sort of digital therapeutics, you know, I think COVID-19 has been a catalyst for change within healthcare systems. I think ultimately, though, digital therapeutics, the main beneficiaries of digital therapeutics will be patients, and we should all be focused on actually getting patients better, getting better outcomes for patients in a more timely way, keeping them at home if necessary, but ultimately it's about treating patients and treating them better than we do today. And if digital therapeutics can enable that, then I think we're in a winning space.
Thank you, Nigel. I really appreciate all of your time. I mean, you know, all of you have great insight and knowledge around this emerging sector. It's only going to grow and get bigger. I mean, there's certain ecosystems where you've got great biotechnology and great technology, and where they come together, we're getting digital therapeutics coming out on the other side of this, whether it's more biotech and less digital, or more digital and less biotech. Ultimately, every one of our products helps and benefits patients, which is really, you know, why we're here and what we're here to support. So first of all, thank you very much. Secondly, this is the last one in our series 1 of ChaiTime. This is number 10. We're going to take a week break and then we're back for series 2. And rather than every week, we're going to probably hold it every other week or so to give some more space. We've got our first one in series 2 already lined up with Ros Deegan and Jennifer Petter on biotech ecosystems in the UK versus the US, or Boston specifically, where Jennifer Petter has built and raised money for a villa, and now Arix Therapeutics, and Ros is leading the charge at o2h Therapeutics in the UK. So that should be a very exciting session with 2 great panelists that we can grill around those topics. And now I'm off to some dog training. So the wife has lined me up for 2 hours of dog training in the park with our puppy. And so I need to get going and enjoy 2 hours in the park with family. So thank you all very much. Really appreciate your time. And we'll see. Thank you all very much for coming and listening as well, and for all the great questions from everybody. And they're still firing in on the various chats that we've got. It's great participation. I'm sorry if I didn't get around to all of them, but we can connect you up with any of the panelists, so forth. Thank you very much, and see you soon.
Cheers, Anna.
Thanks all.